Recording in progress.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Jeanne McKnight, co-chair of this Housing Plan Working Group. And this is an open meeting held remotely per Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to COVID, which has been extended to April 1st, that allows public meetings to be held remotely. All participants, and the people on the screen now are participants, are present by video conference. And I will take attendance by roll call. People, of course, have been invited to attend this public education and listening session. And those people are attendees. And at the point when we come to our question and comments period, they will be allowed, each person individually in order that they appear to ask their question and or make their comment. And at that time, we would like each attendee who speaks to give their name and address. And everybody should realize that this meeting is being recorded. Any votes we take, and I expect the only vote that will come up is at the end of the meeting, a vote to adjourn, will be by roll call. And all supporting materials, including the slideshow that we will be presenting, are posted on the town's website under our link, the Housing Plan Working Group. So the timing of this session will be, we're going to have a presentation that's going to consist of two parts. Natasha Espada, one of our staff, will present on background on affordable housing, some demographic information regarding Needham, to give us that background we need on this subject. And then I will present on the history of zoning in Needham, leading to our present day zoning regarding residential and multifamily housing. Those presentations will take about a half hour, and then we'll turn to the listening session, which will go until 9 o'clock. So let me right now take a roll call of the members of the Housing Plan Working Group and our staff. So when I call your name, say that you're here or present. And first I'll introduce Natasha Espada, my co-chair. Natasha and I serve as co-chairs of this Housing Plan Working Group. Natasha?
Hi, Jeanne. Thank you so much. This is really exciting.
At this time, I'm doing the roll call, so just say you're present or here.
So, present.
Yes. Emily Cooper?
Present.
Ed Cosgrove?
Present.
Laura Dorfman?
Present.
Carol Facchetti? I think Carol is not here yet. Perhaps she'll be joining us. Helen Gregory?
Here.
Dan Matthews?
Here.
Oscar Mertz? You are muted, Oscar.
Here. Sorry.
Marcus Nelson?
Here.
Michael O'Brien?
Here.
Ed Scheidler?
Here.
Rhonda Spector?
Here.
Very good. So now I would like to turn to co-chair Natasha Espada.
Thanks, Jeanne. So one of the things that I want to talk about is why we are doing this, why we're doing this affordable housing plan. So we know that the community is changing and diversifying, and the town's priorities really need to be reviewed. I know that there's a desire and goals to create equity and economic diversity in the town. And the current cost of housing is a barrier to some of these goals. And I know this through my work of Nuari and through all of the listening that we've been able to do to date. But what's important about tonight is that this is a listening session to hear from all of you. And our goals for this housing plan is to begin with tonight with this listening session for the community. We're going to be working on a housing needs study with the group that you see here. We're going to have another community workshop again in March 24th for feedback on visioning and goals. We're going to have another community workshop in the early fall. And the goal is to have a strategic action plan before the end of the year. So if we're going to have, we're going to do the listening right after Karen Sunnarborg's presentation and Jeanne McKnight's presentation on the history and the current status of the affordable housing. And then after that, we'll do Q&A until 9, as Jeanne mentioned. And anything that, if you would like to communicate with the group afterwards, you can always email planning@needhamma.gov to continue this conversation. So with that, I will hand it over to Karen to begin the
Natasha?
presentation. Yes.
Natasha, excuse me. I neglected to introduce our staff and I should have done that. So let me quickly do that.
Sure.
With us is our Director of Planning and Community Development, Lee Newman,
Present.
and our Alex Klee, who is our Assistant Planner,
Present.
and Cindy Gonzalez, who is our Public Information Officer.
Present.
All right. So I didn't want to neglect that because especially Lee will be speaking later. And as Natasha said, now the program is to be turned over to Karen Sunnarborg for her presentation.
Okay. Hi, everybody. We've been looking forward to this evening, and I'm going to try to go through my part of the presentation fairly expeditiously so we can really get to the meat of the matter, which is hearing from you folks. So let's start with the first slide, Alex. So very basic. What is affordable housing? HUD's definition is if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing costs, whether it's rental or home ownership, you have what's called cost burdens and you're living in housing that is not affordable to you. The definition that we typically hear about is that under Chapter 40B Comprehensive Permit Law, which means that a unit is counted as affordable if it meets a number of requirements. One is that it has to be available to households earning at or below 80% of area median income. And area is the whole Boston area. It even includes some communities in New Hampshire, goes all the way down to the coastal communities, and goes all the way out to Framingham, for example. And I'll give you some examples in the next slide. The unit also has to be subsidized, either directly through some local, state, or federal program, or going through what's called a subsidizing agency, a state agency that will give the go-ahead, for example, to a developer to submit a comprehensive permit to the locality. The unit also has to be deed restricted, so that affordability requirements extend into the long term, and we're moving towards in perpetuity to the greatest extent possible. And the units have to be affirmatively marketed so that folks outside of the community have a chance of learning about an opportunity, as well as a chance to apply for a particular unit. There is something called local preference, though, where the town can try to apply for approval to set aside 70% of units in a particular development for those who live or work in the community. There are some other definitions too. You hear sometimes community housing, and that typically relates to units that are occupied by those earning up to 100% of area median income. And those people are eligible for assistance under the Community Preservation Act, CPA. And then you hear workforce housing. And that really oriented to those people who work in the community, whether it be municipal workers or working for other employers, who they might be earning above that 80% of area median income, but nevertheless are shut out of the local housing market. And the photo on the right is a 40B development, Charles River Landing. Next slide. So this table just shows the breakdown in these HUD area median incomes. And every year HUD adjusts them. And they're also adjusted, as you can see on the far left column, by household size. And various percentages are typically oriented to populations in cases housing unit eligibility. For example, 30% of area median income, AMI, so referred to by HUD as extremely low income. 50% AMI at 31 to 50% range are referred to as very low income. And the 51 to 80% range is referred to by HUD as low and moderate income. So for example, if you're a household of 3, and that's the average household size in Needham, the maximum you could earn based on the 2021 limits is 36,250 for a 30% AMI, 60,450, and 90,950 at the 80% AMI level. I added the 100% AMI level that comes from the Community Preservation Coalition. If units are actually occupied by those above 80% of area median income, it can serve a pressing local need and be important, but they cannot be included on this list of state-approved subsidized housing inventory units. Next slide. So what housing does the state count as affordable in Needham? Of the 11,047 currently counted year-round housing units in Needham, 1,410 or 12.776% are included in the subsidized housing inventory. These units are often referred to as the capital A affordable units. And why this is important is because under Chapter 40B, a developer can come in and propose a development that meets all the state requirements under Chapter 40B, including the inclusion of affordable units, and can override local zoning if, in fact, the permit is approved. Now that the town is over that 10% affordability threshold under 40B, it's no longer susceptible to these overrides, but can choose the types of development proposals that come in that meet local priorities and preferences and work cooperatively to get a project that's going to really address local needs. I should mention that 40B is not the only way to produce affordable housing, but it is a good permitting tool. So the town has made great progress on this SHI. It's up from, in 2006, there were 425 units or 3.94% of the year-round housing stock, up to 841 units and 7.6% in 2015. The 20 census figures have only been released on a limited basis. And we are waiting for the census estimates that will give us a figure to count the year-round housing figure. We estimate that when that figure is released, that the 12.76% will decrease modestly, only to 12%, which will still leave a really good cushion for the town in going forward and remaining past that 10% affordability threshold. Just to mention that Of the SHI units, the Needham Housing Authority manages 316 units. These are what's considered deeply affordable. They are oriented to households with incomes typically below that 50% of area median income. That very low income includes some extremely low income occupants as well. And the SHI includes 17 home ownership units at 1.2%. It's worth noting that when the state established 40B, there was this real need to kind of incentivize and try to ensure that multifamily rental development was happening across the state. So the 40B counts all units in a rental project towards the SHI, even though maybe 25% typically are affordable. In ownership projects, though, only the actual affordable units are included. The SHI includes 668 market rental units, therefore, which is like 47% as part of those 40B projects, compared to 742 actually affordable units. And if you just looked at the 742 actual affordable units as part of the year-round housing stock, that percentage is at 6.7%. The new rentals have really been important, though, in diversifying Needham's housing stock, and that is really worth noting. And 40Bs require that 25% of units be targeted to those with incomes at or below 80% of area median income, or alternatively, 20% can be targeted to those at 50% AMI level. I should mention, though, that there are numerous projects across the state where the affordability is at 100% of all the units. These are typically in the case of sponsors whose mission is really driven to create affordable units, often at lower income tiers in that 80% level. That's done through multiple levels of subsidy, including some people might have heard of the low income housing tax credits. So that's worth noting as well. Next slide. So just to give you some demographic information on shifts, this is based on the release so far, the 2020 census figures that have mostly been done for congressional redistricting purposes. Needham's population, based on that count, was 32,091 residents, up considerably from 28,886 in 2010, and representing growth of 11.1%. And you can see at this figure on the right that there was kind of a spike in population in 1970, and then it was reduced and relatively flat until the 2020, where we've got this 11.1% growth to 32,000 plus residents. They released information that told us that 23,652 residents were 18 years of age or older and represented 74% of the population. And that's up from 20,747 and 72% in 2010, and a growth rate of 14%. On the other hand, those less than 18 years of age included 8,439 residents, and there was an increase of 300 of these children from 8,139 in 2010. And that was a lower growth rate of 3.7%. And there's been significant growth in the minority population, from 5% in 2000 to 9% in 2010 and up to 15% in 2020. And also those claiming Hispanic or Latino heritage included 1,223 residents, representing 3.8% of the population. And just some brief information on housing growth. Once again, from the 2020 census, it counted a total of 11,891 units, and that's up 769 units, or 6.9% from 2010. And it's about the same as the growth across the state at 6.8%. Given that that population growth at 11.1% was higher than the housing growth level of 6.9%, one at an indicator of increased household size. And from building permit records, we learned that 98% of new single family permitting between 2010 and 2020 involved tear down activity. Clearly, housing growth was largely fueled by multifamily housing development, particularly the Kendrick 40B development pictured on the right, and the Mondera Needham project, as well as some other developments that included some affordable units. Next slide. So just looking on housing cost trends, I think everybody is aware that costs are rising. And COVID certainly didn't put a dampening effect on rising housing costs. If you look at the chart on the right, it shows the number of units distributed among various ranges of assessed values in town, where the bottom line is assessments in fiscal year 2014, the middle line from fiscal year 2020, and the top line from fiscal year 2022, most recent figures. And you see the increase over time of values, particularly the uptick in numbers of units above $1 million. So those lines at the end, which is almost like a separate housing market. The median single family house value was $1.3 million as of September 2021. That's up from 1,170,000 as of the end of 2020. And this is banker and tradesman information that tracks all sales across the state. And the median value is the middle value between the value in the lowest range to the highest range. I checked just before this, and it hasn't changed much as of December. Market rents are also high. For Chapter 40B developments, the range was $2,600 to $4,200 for Charles River Landing, and $2,200 to $5,000 at the Kendrick. The 1 and 2 bedroom units at the Mondera Needham are starting at $3,200 and $3,600 respectively. Another example, 2 bedroom units in older buildings are at least $1,900, and that would require an income of approximately $84,000. And that assumes that the household's not spending any more than that 30% affordability threshold, and we added some utility costs. So while the income would be needed would be about $84,000, the median income of renters was $41,691 based on 2019 census estimates. 24% of all households had cost burdens as they were spending more than 30% of income on housing costs. And of these, 11% had severe cost burdens because they were spending more than half their income on housing. If you're looking at those earning at or below the 80% of area median income level, the cost burdens increase considerably to 60% cost burdens and 38% with severe cost burdens. So with rising housing costs, it is expected that there would be widening affordability gaps as well. We calculated based on a number of assumptions that affordability gap was $534,000 based on the difference between the median price single family home of $1.3 million and what a median income earning Needham household could afford, or about $766,000. That median income is from the 2019 census estimates at $165,547. And this gap is up considerably from $211,500 in 2014. If you're looking at the 80% of AMI limit for a household of three, the average household size, once again, it's about 3 persons, 2.79 persons townwide and 2.99 for homeowners. The gap increases to $928,500. It's the difference between the 1.3 million and $371,500. And this is up from $556,500 in 2014. And this photo on the right is a picture of the Needham Housing Authority's family development, Captain Robert Cook Drive. And next slide. This slide just shows the changes in median house prices over a period of time by community, starting with Dedham on the far left, and it's Dover, Needham, Newton, Wellesley, West Roxbury, and Westwood. The column on the far left in the grouping is based on the 2005 levels. This is kind of the height of the market before the recession. The one column in the middle is from the 2010 figures, where you can really see the effects of the recession, the downward trajectory of housing prices for all communities. And then the one on the right is based on September 2021, and you see the big spikes for many communities. Hey, and Wellesley's at head of the pack at $1.658 million. Newton at 1.5, and Needham obviously not that far behind at $1.3 million. And so with that, we're going to move on to zoning.
Yes, again, Jeanne McKnight, co-chair of the Housing Plan Working Group and member of the Planning Board. And I'm going to present the history of zoning in Needham, starting in 1925 and going to the present time, and particularly with a focus on residential and multifamily development. So here we have the Needham adopted zoning for the first time in 1925. And that was part of a national movement for local zoning that arose in 1921 when Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover formed a committee on zoning. And so the map on the right is our first zoning map from 1925. And the clear areas that are not shaded are the single residence zones. But lot sizes then were only 7,000 square feet townwide. The select board could grant special permits and waivers, powers that are later were exercised by the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Planning Board. And the select board also could permit one-family houses that were in existence in 1925 to be altered to accommodate two families, what we now call accessory dwelling units. So the particular thing to note is that the whole town at that time was 7,000 square foot lots in its residential areas. Next slide. And just as we have today, general residence zoned areas that allow two-family homes, we had them in 1925, and they are the areas shown in yellow. In the Needham Heights area, the center portion is the area, at and north of the Needham Heights train station. And today that zoned general residence is somewhat smaller than is shown on this map. And then also on the right over to the Charles River off Highland Avenue, you see a large yellow zoned area. That's much smaller today, and that is mostly zoned for business. Then also in Needham Center, there were several blocks that were and still are zoned general residence, and that's the area over to the left of the map. Two-family homes at that time could be built on 7,000 square foot lots in the general residence zone. And hotels and boarding houses were allowed to be built in the general residence zone back then. Okay, next slide. So, yes, did we skip the business districts? There's a slide on business districts. I thought it was worth mentioning. Yeah, and these, they were concentrated in Needham Center over to the left, the area shown in black along Chestnut Street and in Highland Avenue and Chapel Street, and in Needham Heights, and then a small zone along Highland Avenue at the Newton line. Just a few blocks right on Highland Avenue at that time. The purple areas were zoned at that time for manufacturing. You know, we actually had manufacturing mills, particularly right north of Rosemary Lake. Now then, there was no circumferential Route 128. I mean, there may have been some roads, zigzag that were numbered 128, but we didn't have that highway going through our town. And the eastern part of town, that's now mostly zoned for business, you know, where TripAdvisor is and so forth, and, you know, that whole area zoned for business, was at that time zoned single family and that large patch of general residence. And a large area over there to the right side of the map was held by Newton and Brookline for their waterworks. And Needham's waterworks was in that area where the golf course is now. So that's what our land was like in 1925. Okay, next slide. Okay, so when did things change? Well, there was a big change right in the post-war era. In 1948, there was a rezoning of our town for larger lots. And Route 128 construction hadn't started, but it was anticipated and planned for at that time. So our single residence districts were divided into A on the western side of town. You see the 1948 map with the big A. And then in the eastern part of town, you see the B, the residential B. And SRA now required, as it does today, 1 acre lots. And SRB, the lot size was boosted from 7,000 square foot to 10,000 square foot lots. And that's what we have today. And the same with general residences. General residence dimensional regulations were amended to also require 10,000 square foot lots. And the zoning bylaw no longer allowed accessory dwelling units in single residence districts or hotel and boarding houses in general residence districts. So that was a big change in 1948. Next slide. Then in the decades of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and what I'm showing is the 1984 map, we started to provide for multifamily housing. In the early 60s, one apartment district was created on Greendale Avenue near the Dedham line. You can see a little green dot down in the lower part of the zoning map. And that's walk-up buildings, condominium, that's known as Charles Court East. Then in the mid-70s, 2 apartment districts were created. And these is where the manufacturing districts used to be. A1 for Rosemary Lake Apartments, sometimes referred to as the Petrini Apartments, and Rosemary Ridge Condominium off Hillside Avenue near Rosemary Street. I happen to live at Rosemary Ridge Condominium. And also at A2 for the North Hill Continuing Care Retirement Community, shown in the lighter green, kind of in the top center of the map. In the early 80s, A2 was extended to some additional areas along Highland Avenue. Highland Terrace, which is a townhouse condominium that replaced the old high school that was torn down there, and Webster Green, farther north east on Highland Avenue, which is 2 3-story elevator buildings. So we did provide for multifamily housing in a significant way during that time period. Next slide. And of course, I should also say that, you know, during the post-war period, that's when our public housing was built. So significant resources were also provided for lower income persons in our town. So going to recent time period, and this, I think this is, I was serving on the planning board at this time. Mixed use overlay districts were created in 2009. And what's pictured here is a building at 50 Dedham Avenue across from the Unitarian Church. And this is the one building that's been built since that zoning was created under the overlay zoning. And the overlay districts were created for Needham Center area to allow 3-story or 4-story mixed use. And that depended on the location, whether it was Needham Center, Chestnut Street, or Garden Street, whether it was 3-story or 4-story. And you can see that in Dedham Avenue. You can see there's commercial, it's called mixed use because there's commercial or, you know, retail, restaurant type uses on the ground floor, and that's required. That's what we wanted for our downtown areas, and the multifamily housing above. And so what you see here is the 3 stories above. The 4th story is set back on that particular building, so it's not so visible from the street, but it is a 4-story building. Now, in the underlying business districts, 2.5-story mixed-use housing had already been allowed since 1989. An example is 1110 Great Plain Avenue. That's across from the mobile station on Great Plain Avenue. And also recently built at 15 Oak Street is another building with commercial on the ground floor and 1.5 stories of housing above. Also in Avery Square, Needham Heights area, we similarly allowed 2.5-story mixed-use housing. And there are a couple of examples there. One is at 868 Highland Avenue, that's above the framing store, and just across from the Avery Square town green there. Recently there was a change also to allow mixed-use buildings at the very small neighborhood business overlay district at Central Avenue and Reservoir Street, where Pinella's Market is located. So next slide. Now, we also do allow multifamily housing in a few of our business districts. In 2016, an overlay district was created off Highland Avenue, extending to the Charles River and the Newton boundary, where multifamily buildings or mixed-use buildings, it could be either, are allowed up to a total in the entire zone of 250 units. And this is the area, you know, with You Do It Electronics, Staples. No development has been proposed there yet. And then in 2021, I'm sure many of us remember, just a year ago, the Highway Commercial 1 zone was created for the Muzzy Channel 5 site, allowing, but not requiring, I mean, in neither case is housing required in a development, multifamily or mixed-use housing with an upper limit of 240 units. And we've seen no development proposal for that site yet. Now, standalone multifamily housing is also allowed in a small district called the Hillside Avenue Business District. And that's off Hillside Avenue near the Honeywell Street intersection. And here's an example of 400 Honeywell Street. It is under construction now, an 8-unit apartment building. And many of our business and industrial districts, however, prohibit multifamily housing. Next slide. We also have provided for age-restricted multifamily housing. I already mentioned that North Hill was rezoned in the 70s to allow the continuing care retirement community. There's no requirement that percentage of the units at North Hill be affordable, however. But in the recently created Elder Services District for the Wingate residences on Gould Street that was rezoned in 2010 to allow age-restricted independent living, 10% of the units are affordable, must be affordable. And in more recently rezoning 2020 for the Avery Square Overlay District to allow the Carter's building on Highland Avenue to have age-restricted independent living units. We upped that percentage to 12.5% of the units being affordable. Next slide. So now I'm just going to quickly go over our districts and mention the where multifamily is allowed and what the affordability requirement is. So Highland Commercial 1, as I said, you do it Highland Commercial 1, that's the Muzzy site. 12.5% have to be affordable. Mixed use 128 overlay. That's the you do it electronics area, 12.5%. The elder services for Wingate, 10% affordable. Now the Avery Square business, and you can only have rather small buildings, but there's no affordability requirement. And the same thing as I showed you the photo on Hillside Avenue business, no affordability requirement. Next slide. Now this is where we allow mixed use development by special permit. I mentioned that small district neighborhood business where the Pinellas Market is. You can have a 2.5-story building, mixed use. Needham Center business, same thing, 2.5-story, 1.5 floors housing. In Needham Center business, the underlying zone, we've got underlying zone and overlay. In the underlying zone, there's no affordability requirement. But in Needham Center Overlay A, where you can have a 4-story building, there is a 10% affordability requirement. Needham Center B, where you can have a 3-story building, that's right around the town hall, 10%. Garden Street Overlay, which is right across my residential area, 3-story buildings, 10%. Chestnut Street business, this is the underlying zone where the development was just built at 15 Oak Street. No affordability requirement. Lower Chestnut Street Overlay, you can have a 4-story building and 10% affordable. And although I say this is by special permit, in fact, if it's up to 5 units, it is by right in the Lower Chestnut Street Overlay District, but anything bigger than that requires a special permit. Next slide. So I'm just going to, I have to be quick because we got to finish. We got to go to our listening session. I just want to tell you what districts we have that do not require any do not allow, multifamily housing is prohibited. So we have our industrial zones on Reservoir Street, on Highland Avenue, near the intersection of Arbor Street. This is, heading out toward 128. Hillside Avenue at Rosemary Street. And that district goes from Rosemary Street along Hillside Avenue almost to West Street. And Crescent Road, which is a small industrial patch off West Street. Denmark Lane is zoned industrial off Maple Street. Somehow that got to be developed, I don't know when, for multifamily residential condominium, actually. And then we have Industrial 1, which is Gould Street, north of the MBTA right-of-way. That's north of the Muzzy site, on the other side of the MBTA right-of-way. And then, of course, our very large Highland Commercial 128, where TripAdvisor and Sheraton Hotel are, that does not allow multifamily housing, but that's where we have the 2 large 40B developments that provide hundreds of units of multifamily housing permitted under 40B. And then, oh, excuse me, I misspoke. I said Highland Commercial 128. I was speaking of the New England Business Center zone, which is actually in the next line. But Highland Commercial 128, again, is the UDOIT, Staples area. And the housing is allowed by special permit in the mixed use overlay district on the northwest side of Highland Avenue, but not on the other side. And then we have our business district. This is kind of a leftover, we used to have a bunch of business districts. We have one left, and that is on Highland Avenue, on the west side of Highland Avenue, north of May Street. And that, is the funeral homes on the corner of May Street and Highland Avenue, and then going up to Sudbury Farms on Rosemary Street. That whole strip, zone business, no multifamily housing allowed. Okay, I think this is my final slide coming up. And it's just quickly, this is where we do allow multifamily or mixed use housing, but we don't have an affordability unit requirement. The Avery Square business, the Hillside Avenue business, the Center business in the underlying zone, and the Chestnut Street business is in the underlying zone. And these are the underlying zone for the smaller developments. Then, of course, I mentioned the apartment zoning districts that were created in the 70s and 80s. There was no affordability requirement, and there's still, they're all fully developed, but there is no affordability requirement. And same thing at North Hill. And, I want to mention also that we have no affordability requirement for new lots created in a single family or general residence district, by division of land or by subdivision. It's an idea that we might think about, but there is no such requirement at present. So at this point, I hope this is helpful background for our listening session. And I'm going to turn over the gavel to co-chair Natasha Espada, who I believe is also going to introduce our planning director, Lee Newman, for a few comments before we start with the listening session.
No, actually, Jean, I think Natasha's going to go next.
Yes.
And then I'll do Lee afterwards. So the two major questions for tonight are, what are the greatest local housing needs and how should the town best address these needs? And we'd like to do is start listening. We have 69 attendees and I see 2 hands up. So Alex, could we maybe turn off the presentation so that, and then if Thomas Harkins can be brought in, that would be great. He's the first one. And so what we need is for everyone to please state your name and your address before you begin giving us your questions or comments. Alex, you're bringing them in, right? Each one individually?
Yep, I'm just trying to bring in Thomas Harkins. Mr. Harkins, sometimes, depending on the device you're on, it asks you if you want to become a panelist, and you have to say yes if it does ask you.
Should we go?
Yeah, maybe I'll go to the next one and I'll keep working
next
on
one?
it.
Okay, so the next one is Henry. We don't have a last name. Oh.
And people do have to unmute themselves when they.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Henry Reagan, I live on Bennington Street. My question goes to the last 2 slides that Ms. McKnight was showing, where it talked about properties that either did not allow for multiple unit housing or didn't allow for affordable housing. And I'm wondering, given that that's a lot of property and a lot of potential for building those kind of housing, what would it take in order to change those designations so that if we did as a town want to build either multiple unit housing or affordable housing there, we would be able to? And thank you.
Jean, will you like to take that question? Or Lee?
Yes, it would take a zoning bylaw amendment. And typically zoning bylaw amendments require a 2/3 vote of town meeting. And typically amendments are proposed by the planning board. And it may be that will be the result of this year-long process the Housing Plan Working Group is going through, that at the end of that process, we will have some proposals for rezoning of some of our areas. And the same thing to require some of the zones we have already created that do allow multifamily housing or mixed-use housing. It would take a zoning bylaw amendment to introduce and require that any building built there have an affordability requirement. Now, there was a recent amendment to the state law that sometimes is referred to as the housing choice law, and it reduced the quantum of vote for town meeting to approve rezoning for multifamily housing, and from the 2/3 to a majority vote. Now, it's a very, laws are always very complicated, so it takes some analysis to figure out for any particular zoning amendment whether it's the 2/3 vote or the majority vote. But that's what it takes, Mr. Reagan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. The next person, Alex, do you want to try again, Thomas Harkins, see if he can?
I've tried multiple times and I'll just keep trying him amongst everything else
Okay.
we're doing. And
So John Bullion is the next one. Thank you. Great. I see Mr. Bullion.
Good evening, everybody. Thank
Good
you for
evening.
doing this evening. John Bullion, 86 Peacedale Road, former select board member for 18 years. And I was very pleased to see Karen's charts, Karen's presentation, showing and supporting basically the work that the board has done for many years over the past number of years. We set out on a path to not only meet the elements of 40B under the 10% guidelines, but exceed it. And clearly, for the comparison communities that Karen showed, we are number one, at least in the communities that were on that chart. That being said, it's always been my feeling that we should continue adding levels of affordability as new projects come before the town. That being said, one of the things that I wanted to comment on with respect to the chart, Karen, is I was intrigued by the cost burden percentages that you showed. And what that seems to support, based upon the information that I've received during the pandemic, is that we have a significant percentage of the population that has been dealing with financial insecurity because of the pandemic and due to the many factors relative to the pandemic. And now we moved into a different stage of our pandemic, which now includes substantial inflation. So one of the things that I have seen personally, as somebody who's lived in this town for many years, and I'm sure others have, is that our real estate taxes are going up and seem to be going up a lot. Now, I know through many of the actions that I and the board put forth that, yes, we bear some responsibility for that. But we also need to take responsibility for maintaining a stable debt load, which we have done and been successful for, and all of the other elements of the operating and capital budgets that many of the people that are on this panel and many of us who are still involved are involved with. So with that, comment opening it up, I guess what I'd say is this. I support moving forward with adding levels of affordability to our housing stock. I am concerned and am looking for more information on the new state legislation that designates multifamily housing by right in transit districts. And I know that the state is still working on final regulations and language relative to that. But as was reported by Greg Reedman in his newsletter today, it would appear, if his number is correct for Needham, that could provide for the possibility of almost 2,400 units of additional housing in and around the transit districts in Needham. In addition to that, I also favor expanding the use of ADUs in town, and those would not be affordable qualified, but my understanding in moving Needham and other communities in the greater Boston area towards better affordability is to create more housing. So creating more housing, I think, is a good thing. The only caution that I throw up is everything, in my opinion, should be done incrementally. That in order not to destabilize the services that are provided to residents of this town and the ability for the residents who reside here, not just the wealthy, but those are the rest of us that need to be able to live and afford to live here and afford to live our lives. So keeping an eye on housing, a lot of housing that might create the need to move Paulet and Mitchell into the position of being done much sooner than our debt structure can handle, and that the residents would be able to handle individually through their property taxes. As was brought forth at a recent select board meeting when Dave Davidson was asked if the Mitchell and Paulet projects were brought forth now, what would that do to the debt? And his response was it would double the debt of this town. And as a town meeting member, as somebody who likes staying active and understands our debt policy and supports it, I think we have to watch for the balance of bringing on significant amounts of new housing with the ability for the people who live in this town and have lived in this town to be able to afford to stay and live here. Because it makes no sense to me to add such significant amount of housing that it drives people that have put their heart and soul into this town out of this town. That's not fair. And there needs to be an element of equity involved with the decisions that we all collectively make. So I thank you for the time this evening. And I look forward to this process continuing. And I look forward to ongoing hearings and discussion. Thank you. And if you have any questions, otherwise, have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Bullion, for all of those comments. Alex, I think Jerry Rovner. I think they need to unmute. Yeah, perfect.
Okay,
Hi. Please state your name and address, please.
yes, my name is Jerry Rovner. I live at 48 Cynthia Road. My question deals with some definitions of what is an accessory dwelling unit. Does it mean that it has to have a separate entrance, a separate bathroom, a separate kitchen? And has any work been done on establishing what an ADU really is going to encompass?
Thank you. Lee, is this something that you would like to answer, or Karen?
Sure, I can take that. Well, Needham does have an accessory apartment bylaw. It was adopted within the last 2 years. And under the definition, essentially it is like a single unit apartment. It contains a independent kitchen, I think is really what the defining definition is. The town essentially has limited those kinds of units though to individuals who are related to the property owner or who are caregivers in the house. There has been some consideration about broadening the accessory dwelling unit to make it available to folks that are unrelated to the primary homeowner. And the ZBA has been issuing a number of permits for those. I think there's been interest since it was adopted, and I think they're issuing about 1 or 2 a month. So we do have an accessory apartment bylaw in Needham. I think the question is whether or not the town wants to basically enlarge the profile of those that actually are eligible to live in those units and the parameters under which they're issued.
Does that also include necessary parking?
The bylaw has a provision to have actually parking on the property to accommodate the unit. And those accessory dwelling units are currently permitted through the ZBA, and there's a special permit process. And so an individual proposing one of those units presents it to the ZBA. The neighborhood is notified of the application, has a chance to come in and review the application and offer comments before the ZBA actually makes a decision on it. I think the applications that have been submitted so far have been positively received by the neighborhoods in which they are located.
And then the final question, is the town working on an amendment to the bylaw to provide anybody to become the occupant of that ADU?
I think that's a question for the committee. That's probably one of the options they'll be considering as an alternative way of enlarging the inventory of affordable housing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rovner. The next person that I see up, Alex, is Rachel Green. Hi, Ms. Green.
Hello. Hi, I just wanted to speak on, I really think that the planning.
Excuse me, Ms. Green, can you just state your name and?
Oh, yeah. My name is
address?
Rachel
Thank you.
Green, and I live at 55 Sargent Street.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, I think there should be a really strong stance on racial equity. And I think in terms of like zoning, there should be like as much zoning reform as possible. I think the new MBTA bill is a good start. But I think having like as much density and opportunity for just more units is going to be beneficial to the town, even if, whatever like side effects come from that, like maybe people in town aren't used to that much housing, but I think the benefits really outweigh those concerns there. And I think the group could also look into like reparations programs. Could be something, to look into. And yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you, Ms. Green.
Natasha, this is Alex. I wondered if I could try for Thomas Harkins, just allowing him to speak as an attendee and not actually moving him over.
Sure.
Just to give a new option a try since. So, Thomas Harkins, you might be able to speak now if you could give it a try.
It looks like he's unmuted. Well, let's try again after.
Okay.
We have 3 others here in the queue. Equal Justice Needham Families. That is the next one.
Hi, my name is Peter Olive. I'm at 133 Thornton Road. I logged on to Jill's computer. She's Equal Justice Needham, but I'm just speaking as a concerned citizen, not Equal Justice Needham family. Sorry. Thank you so much for all the great work you guys are doing. I really appreciate it. It's awesome. And Jeanne, the history of the zoning laws, very cool. Question popped up. In 1948, when we changed the zoning, I know no one knows this, but it just begs the question. When we changed the zoning, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Well,
When you guys, when we changed the zoning from a 7,000 square foot up to 10,000 and 1 acre, it just begs the question: what motivated that? I know probably nobody here on this board knows the answer to that, but I'd love to try to research that. Maybe the Historical Society could dig into that. But it just smacks of racial segregation to me. I know we've seen racial covenants in the past that excluded Black folks from moving and buying property in Needham, and the covenants were explicit, or they were kind of not explicit. They were, minimum number of properties, minimum size of property, things like that. So anyway, I guess I just want to say that I'd like to echo what Rachel Green said. I'd like to try to look at some remedies for some of our past racial discriminations. Needham is a very segregated town, and I think we need to try to fix that. And I'm looking for solutions from this board. Thank you very much.
thank you so much, Peter. Jean, do you remember why it was changed? And is that Jean has a lot of knowledge, so I just want to make sure. She might already have an answer.
He sure does.
Thanks for referring to me, Natasha. I am fascinated by this history, and I very much want to research it further. I don't have the answers. I know that once 128 came in, pollution resulted to the water supplies that I had mentioned. And our water supply was moved up to the Wellesley line where it exists today and provides us with a good source of water. But that pollution couldn't have been an issue in 1948, it seems to me. So I don't fully understand. I would love to work with Gloria Grice, our wonderful town historian, to see what the local papers were saying then. What was the town meeting? What kind of history is there of the action at town meeting at that time? But I don't have any answers right now.
Thank you, Jean.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. So I see here also Deanna Alex is the next person.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you
Okay. Can you
say
see
your
me?
name?
Hey, yes, Deanna Springer. I live on 820 Webster Street. Thank you for this educational presentation. I'm new to all of this. My question is, well, the concern for me that I wanted to raise for the town is housing for disabled young adults, disabled growing adults. Particularly for the families who have lived in this town. Their children have been educated in this town through Needham Public Schools special education and are graduating now. Inclusion has been a great thing within our public schools, and we've raised our children to be involved in our local community. And now, as in my case, my son is going to be 21. He'll be leaving the school system. He has special needs. He's disabled. He's not going to be able to hold a job competitively. He's not going to be able to pay market price or even the affordable unit price that I saw posted tonight. Our house is not one that we can convert to an ADU. And we're just one family of many families of children who are going to be graduating, and we would like our children to stay in the community, and they want to stay in the community into which they raised, and they know they can walk to the library, they can go to the grocery store, they can walk to the pool. So I want to know how, I don't even know if you're aware of this. There's a housing shortage for disabled people. These are the children, young adults who are not going to qualify for priority one housing via the Department of Developmental Services. They are not severe enough, but they are not able to live independently. Some can live independently, but they are not going to be able to work competitively. There is no housing for them. And so we're trying to find solutions. And so I wanted to raise this, make you aware of this, and see how we can work. Families coming up through the CPAT can work with you to find housing for our kids who want to stay here.
Thank you so much. Lee, I don't know, or Jean, I don't know if there is any information or any work that has been done in that sector, but I think this is great for us to know as a committee.
Thank you. Who can I follow up with? Is there anyone I can follow up with?
If you want me to respond quickly, sure. I think Deanna, when she referred to housing that might be available to severely disabled people through the Department of Developmental Services, was referring to what we call group homes. And there are group homes in Needham, and they in fact count toward 40B. But the person's Diana is describing her son apparently are not qualified for that level of care. We didn't spend time talking about the importance of our public housing, but that's a resource for both seniors and younger disabled persons. And our housing authority is seeking funds, has a plan for renovation and even reconstruction of some of its properties that will create more opportunities. And that's something that this town, it doesn't necessarily involve zoning changes. It might in a couple of cases, but it's something certainly that needs support in this town. And Deanna, you telling your story really helps that effort.
And Deanna, you mentioned, who do you follow up with? I think we're absorbing all of this information. This is why we're having this listening session. We will have another one on March 24th, and we will be discussing in between the working group will be working towards looking for all different types of solutions. So we'll be following up with our progress March 24th.
Thank you.
So thank you. Alex, I see Mo Handel is next. Hi, Mo. I think you're on mute still.
How's that?
Perfect.
Sorry about that. Mo Handel, 3 Rosemary Street. Thank you very much for letting me speak. I've been very impressed by what I've heard so far. I also want to call out Jeanne McKnight, who gave a wonderful history of our current zoning and our current situation. I just want to speak to a couple of issues. One is a nagging concern I have about starter housing stock, and I'll just put that into a personal observation. I live across the street from a house that served as a starter home for 5 or 6 families in the time I've lived here. That house is very soon to be on the market. I guarantee you it will not be a starter home when it's rebuilt after it's torn down. There are 7 or 9 houses on the market in Needham. The problem we face as a community, with respect to starter homes at least, is the land is far too valuable. That's a regional issue, but as long as that's the case, anything that goes on the market, if it's going to be affordable to a family who is less than relatively high income, it's going to go to a developer and it's going to be ripped down. And until we come to a common solution on that issue, we're going to lose the housing stock, the starter housing stock. Secondly, with respect to diversity in the town, I think it's clear that the town is becoming increasingly racially diverse, which I think is a highly positive thing. But while that's happening, we're becoming increasingly or decreasingly economically diverse. The people who are moving to this town are relatively wealthy people. This town is becoming a very wealthy, affluent suburb. It already is a relatively wealthy, affluent suburb. I'm not putting a value on that one way or the other, but it's a reality. And it's because the area around Greater Boston, particularly around 128, calls for that in terms of economic incentives. We need a regional approach to addressing those economic incentives. And until we come to that, any local solution we come up with is going to produce very expensive small units. The best example I can think of is the Maple Street and Great Plain Avenue. What is the value of those units on the market now? They were built as little condominium units. They're very, very expensive units. That's not going to go away as long as there's an excess of demand among people who have a lot of resource. Lastly, well, I think I'll end it there, but I'm very, very glad that this committee is in process and is looking at this issue. We have a lot of work to do as a community. I think we've come a long way on creating housing in Needham and creating housing alternatives in Needham. That doesn't mean our work is done, and I'm glad you folks are taking that up, and I support your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I see Peter O'Neill, Alex, is the next. Hi, Mr. O'Neill, if you could unmute yourself. I think we can hear you. If you could state your name.
Okay, I am Peter O'Neill. I live at 198 Fair Oaks Park. I don't see me, but can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, you're better off not
seeing
seeing
you, but
me.
we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. I actually have a question regarding the MBTA community that I think John Bullion addressed. And hopefully this is a short question with a quick answer. Does it function essentially as 40B, that if somebody comes in and wants to build a multi-unit complex within a half a mile of one of our stations, that the town can't say that's not suitable for zoning? They can override that similar to a 40B?
Jeanne, would you like to take that?
Do you want me to answer that?
Sure.
Natasha, I've read the law. I've read the proposed regulations. No, it would not work like that. If the town doesn't meet the standards of the law and the regulations for having a certain rather high number of multifamily units within a half mile of its public transit resources, and by the way, that includes the bus line, then there are certain grants that the town will no longer be eligible to get. And I don't know to what extent our town has relied and really cares about getting those grants, but that's the enforcement. It does not allow developers to come in and simply build there in those locations. It encourages towns to rezone so that they will meet the standards, so that they will be eligible for those grants.
Okay, and I hadn't intended to ask this, and it came up with Deanna, who's a friend, and regarding group homes. As the parent of a special needs child who is more intellectually disabled than physically disabled, and about to want to live independently, this may not be the appropriate forum for this question. And if you want to pass on it and point me to the right person who can help me, that would be fine. But is a group home something that requires a special permit?
Jeanne, I'll let you.
No, I believe not, because a group home is simply a home. And actually, even in our zoning bylaw, we have a certain number of unrelated people who can live together. And that's fine. It's just considered a single family house. I think it may be 4 unrelated people, but some number like that, 4 or 5. So the persons, and I know group homes. I have a sister who lives in a group home. My brother, now deceased, lived in a group home. Generally, there are 4 people living together with staff who do not live there. And that's perfectly allowed in any house in our town.
Okay, so would the staff person be considered one of the unrelated people?
No, because they would have overnight staff. I mean, for people who are so disabled that they need overnight staff, somebody would be there, but they don't live there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. I'm looking here and I don't see any other, Alex, I don't see any, oh, I see here, Paula Dickerman. And then Mr. Matthews, we'll get to you in a second.
Sure.
We have two more, Mrs. Dickerman and a person named Lewis. Hi, can you please state your name and address?
Yeah, Paula Dickerman at 20 Burnside Road. I wanted to underscore everything that Mo Handel said. And with regard to starter homes, one idea is to rezone so that maybe just in certain areas of town, maybe within the MBTA and bus corridor, we allow up to 4 units to be built on a 10,000 square foot lot. It provides more housing. It provides starter home kinds of prices, I hope. Not necessarily, but we can hope so. So that's one idea. I'd also really like to see the committee come up with a goal for affordable housing. Right now we're at 6.2%. I understand the SHI thing. That's lovely. That's not reality. Reality is 6 point whatever it is % affordability. And as Mr. Handel said, the economic diversity in town is low. And we can do better. We can provide more affordable housing, maybe 10%, 12%, 15%. I don't know what the goal is. And then we'll figure out how to get there. But I think that's important for the town. I think it's important for our children to have all kinds of different diversity in their lives, because that's what the world looks like. And I think we can do a lot to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gorman. Appreciate it. The next person with their hand up is Lewis. And Lewis, if you can unmute yourself, please.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, hi. Can you state your
Hi.
name and address, please?
Yeah, Lou Wolfson, 29 Semino Road. My question's regarding something that Jeanne brought up the other evening about parking and some of the, she was talking about possibly reducing the parking in some of these developments that I think now require 1.5 per unit, especially where they're trying to go to more transit oriented. I know that people of my age group and most people that are married at least have 2 cars, and if they're trying to downsize, are still gonna want to have those 2 cars parked somewhere. You know, even if they do downsize and go into one of these smaller units. I guess my question is, someone mentioned the other evening that if we reduce it, you know, in years from now, then they'll be required to have that 1 car. So I was just wondering, for consideration, what some of the housing members here are thinking about going forward.
I think, Lee, do you have any information on this? I think what we're doing today is listening. We don't have any information on how we're moving forward, but Lee, if you could if you have any information on that.
Well, on that particular issue, which is about setting about what is the appropriate parking requirement for multiple family housing, Needham is going to be participating in a study with MAPC, facilitated through the Home Consortium, of which we are a member, which is going to be looking at really what is the actual parking demand at residential developments through a study that they're facilitating where the actual cars are going to be counted. There was some preliminary work that was done earlier by MAPC on this very issue, which seems to indicate that the parking standard that towns have incorporated in their zoning is too restrictive. So depending upon the data that comes out of that, it may support Needham re-examining the standards that it's applying as it relates to parking requirements for multiple family dwellings, which would have some positive impact, especially in the center where one of the constraining costs is economic to redevelopment. And if you can bring the parking numbers down, which is the parking that would be provided to be constructed underground, it opens up doors that were previously restricted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your notes. And I'd like Mr. Matthews has some information also in the MBTA for the previous questions.
Sure. Thank you, Natasha. There were a couple of questions addressing the current initiative from the MBTA around MBTA and the DHCD to encourage greater housing allowed densities near T stations, which in Needham would include our commuter rail stations. That's a process that's really just at its very beginning. The state has issued guidelines just within the past couple of weeks. It's an 11-page document that I think a lot of people are trying to wade through now. If you Google MBTA multifamily zoning, you will be able to find it and try to kind of figure out its implications. It's a draft, so there's going to be a lot of work and adjustment to this, presumably before it becomes the force of law. But it is a priority for the current governor's administration, so presumably their target is to finish it up and have it implemented this year. It does affect questions such as the ones of should we allow, say, in our general residence, where we now have 2-family as of right, should we be going to 3-family, or should we have more areas zoned for apartments near train stations? Those are the questions that are raised there. And the state definitely wants to try to implement that as part of a regional way to affect the housing supply. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. That was really helpful. So I'm looking and I don't see any other questions. Please raise your hand if you have any questions. We'd like to hear from you and we'll pull you into the meeting. We'll give it a couple of minutes. Or while we're waiting for any other questions, does anyone else from the working group have any comments or thoughts that they'd like to share tonight? Marcus?
Thank you so much, Natasha, and the planning board for putting this together and being a part of this working group. I think everything that has been said is something that is of vast importance. When I think about the ADUs, sorry about that, and things that can happen sooner than later, and things that we can kind of improve and give maybe not whole homes or single family homes, but having the opportunity to have people move into, those parcels and be a part of the community in that way, I think is something that is really important. I think about, the zoning bylaws and the amendments and changing that and what it would look like, going to town meeting. And what I've seen, especially in the past year, is that so many more people are using their voices and being involved and just have such a intuition or have the opportunity to let all of us know, how important it is to make Needham a place, a destination place. And for people from all different walks of life, all different cultural experiences, socioeconomic statuses, and be a place where we can thrive and aspirationally do that together. And it's not going to happen unless we make these changes, unless we tackle these tough decisions, which, you know, this working group is going to be a part of, and this town seems like we are really committed to. So this being the first step of that process, getting the input from all of you is extremely important, and it is so appreciated. And knowing that the next time that we meet and discuss out with all of you will be in March, but know between now and then, this group is going to be doing a lot of work behind the scenes to take all of the input that you put in and, you know, really do our best to have, you know, more answers to your questions. And for someone like Dee, who had brought up very good points, and Peter O'Neill, and making sure that when we're thinking about diversifying Needham, we're thinking about all of our people. You know, we're thinking about everyone, you know, persons of disabilities. We're thinking about the diversity from a racial lens. We're thinking about like Mo Handel said, about our, you know, socioeconomic and our lack thereof of diversity when it comes to the economic side. And I think this focus and this work is just going to do something for this town that has been, you know, building over the years. And I think this is, you know, this year, in the next year or so, is where we're going to really be able to take that step where we can see tangible changes. And I'm just happy to be a part of that and just so appreciate it. I appreciate all of you for being here and using your voices to let us know, you know, what we need to do and what our town needs to kind of push forward.
Thank you, Marcus. Appreciate it. And I agree with you. I see 2 hands just went up. So Ross Donald is the next person to come in. And for those of you that don't feel comfortable speaking in public, again, you can always email the planning department, and we will give that information before the end of the meeting as well.
And start video if I can do that. Yeah, all right. Yeah, I was wondering if there is a housing authority representative.
Excuse me, Mr. Donald, can you say your name and your address just to make sure that we have your information?
Yeah, Ross Donald, and let's see if I can get this set up properly. And I live at 25 Chambers Street, and I was wondering if there is a housing authority representative on this committee.
And so,
yes, there is Mr. Scheidler.
Yeah.
Mr.
Okay.
Scheidler, are you there? Yes.
We have a housing authority. He was.
Question from Mr. Scheidler.
No, I was just wondering if he was here. Maybe I'm not getting the full gallery perspective. Okay, good. Good to see him. Let's see. Well, that was basically my question. I hope you'll give some attention, especially with the question that Mo raised. And if you look at some of the statistics with a certain eye, you know, the racial problem is not the problem in Needham. People can buy, whatever their race, whatever their cultural background, they can buy their way into Needham. A poor person can't buy their way into Needham. So that's going to be perhaps a more difficult than the committee can address. But that is the issue. Where's the workforce going to come from? I would like to. Well, anyway. Thank you for taking up this job.
Thank you. The next person that I see here is Cynthia Landau. Hi, Ms. Landau. Please state your name and your address.
Okay, my name is Cynthia Landau. I live at 57 Pine Street in Needham. I have one quick question and a couple of comments. The question is whether tear downs in Needham, if a developer buys a house and wants to tear it down, can he tear any house anywhere in Needham down as of right, or are special permits required? Can somebody answer that quickly, and then I have a follow-up for that?
Yeah, sure. Lee, would you like to answer that?
Sure. If it's a conforming lot and the structure that's going to be placed on that property is going to conform after it's reconstructed, then it can be done by right. It does not require any special permit.
Okay, so one thing in thinking about the loss of starter houses and things like that is that perhaps we could consider having some sort of a moratorium on tear downs in order to look specifically at, I see so many really nice small houses that are perfectly habitable, could easily be renovated and rehabbed for a family, for new homeowners that could be saved rather than torn down. And I wonder if there's another way to look at that and look at maybe requiring special permits for tear downs and having, being able to have some dialogue about that. Beyond that, I just wanted to say that I'm so grateful for what you people have done here tonight. You've put an awful lot of work into this, and it's wonderful to have you looking at all these issues and working on them. I think everything that everybody said was really important, and all the issues that were brought up were really important. I would like to just stress a couple of things in terms of as we move forward with this. I think we have to be mindful as we really increase population, first of all, about how far we want to go with that and how big a town we really want to be. I think of Needham really more as a small town and a little bit more on the rural side. And it seems that we're gearing up for growing ourselves into more of a city and a much more densely populated town. So I'd like to be able to have some dialogue. That's not to exclude anybody from coming in either, but I'd love to be able to have some dialogue about how big we anticipate getting and how big, what we would like to see there. And also I'd like to know that we're being mindful of doing this incrementally and as we go along, and I'm sure you're doing this already, we just haven't spoken about it, is looking at our capacity for social services, police services, and the size of our schools and our ability to integrate a lot more people into our community and to do it well as we go along and just not have it all happen really very quickly and so fast that we're not keeping up with the other parts of it that are necessary to welcoming new people into our community. That's basically what I had to say. Thank you again for everything you've done. I'll look forward to your next session in March, and I'm grateful that you people are doing this.
Thank you, Mrs. Landau. And I think the goal is to look at all of the items that are being brought up today by the group. I see Laura Dorfman has her hand up, and then Oscar Mertz as well.
Thank you. I wanted to make a comment about the starter home issue, which has come up a couple of times. I also serve on the Historical Commission, and right now the bylaws do not prevent any type of delay or review unless the home to be torn down is listed on the inventory of historical buildings. And if that's the case, it's only a 6-month delay. I did a little bit of a study for the commission on like towns and what their demo delay guidelines were, and most all of them had at least an age restriction or a year built restriction, not just if they were listed on a historic inventory. And so that's something, I think we need to think about and maybe work with the Historical Commission on, because otherwise there's, other than what, Lee and others who know a lot more about this than I do have said, there's no restriction at all on tearing down homes unless they're listed on an historic register, notwithstanding any sort of zoning
Special
bylaws
permit.
or
Right.
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that. I'm looking at the bylaws right now. It's section 2.11.5.2 under demolition. So that's something we might want to look at more closely. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Mertz?
Thank you. I'd like to echo everything I've heard tonight and to express my gratitude to all the thought and passion that we've heard, a lot of issues that we are eager to tackle on this committee, and to continue to communicate more with everyone who's contributed tonight, and to urge more to join this conversation, because it is all about having a conversation to talk about these issues. And it's going to be a lot of work, but you can imagine that our feet are working very fast under the water to get through a lot of data, and to really figure out what it means, and then to figure out how we plan to approach these challenges. And they're significant. The one thing I would like to say, it was a little tidbit, I think, that Jeanne said early in the evening, and it is that this effort, I think, that's beginning, is to figure out the breadth of the challenges and the needs, and then figure out how do you restructure our zoning, and how do you incentivize what we want to happen through zoning, which is one of the things that we can do. We can emphasize what we would like and provide increases to potential developers or whoever would be doing this work, so that we can try and have positive conversations about all of these and positive outcomes. But we're laying groundwork for the possibilities to occur, and we're not doing the work. So I think so that is interesting, because we want to set those guidelines that allow for these things to happen. And there are lots of things that we've talked about. ADUs is one tiny piece. It's adding multifamily, it's adding inclusionary zoning and requirements for affordability. But it takes time, it takes years to see changes. Even all this work that's required with the MBTA process is going to put the zoning changes in place, but that doesn't mean that all that stuff is coming online immediately. It means that it's going to happen over years, over decades. So the incredible regional shortage that we know is putting the pressure on all of us, is that there are 200,000, the regional calculation is that we're 200,000 housing units short. And so if the pace of all of our jobs is going and our population is doing this, and the pace of the increase in housing is doing this, you can see why there's an incredible shortfall, there's an incredible increase in demand, or a lack of supply. So we are looking to see how we can position ourselves to be smart, to address all these challenges, and then lay the groundwork through the zoning reform, and then see how this will happen and encourage this to happen. But it does take time. So when we are, and we do need to know what the impacts are on schools and on our services. So I think we can be proactive about that while we're doing all of this. I think we have to be looking at all of our different committees and groups, and understanding the data across all of our services, so that we make these decisions wisely. And thank you for everyone who spoke tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. And I agree. And I think that part of the reason why this committee was put together was to have a lot of diverse voices. And then part of the reason why we're having this listening session, in addition to the further sessions that we're going to have, is to be able to get even a broader net to understand all of the issues. And hopefully this committee, with all the information and experience that they have, we can divide and conquer some of these issues, so that we can, be able to make a significant amount of progress this year, because it is a lot to tackle. Mr. Matthews, please.
Sure. Thanks, Natasha. And I really want to thank everybody, because this is a lot of information, a long evening, and a long way to go. A couple of things that really stand out to me that I hope might be areas of focus are a couple of things. It's been said, and I'm really sort of repeating some things that have been said, but mainly for emphasis. The issues we're dealing with are based on a regional problem in Greater Boston, a shortage of both subsidized and moderately priced units. We had to do our part, and we had to meet in meeting that regional need, and we had to help meet local needs as well that are specific to us. A couple of things that are really in the near term for me are, it's important for the town to support the Needham Housing Authority, which is a separate agency, but there are a number of areas in which we can be helpful in implementing their full 2019 capital plan, which provides decades of deferred maintenance and capital improvement, plus additional units on land that they already own to meet housing needs for some of the lowest income people in our area. And then I would encourage people to watch this MBTA transportation related density program. I know that it's going to be worrisome in a lot of places. It's complicated, but one of the issues that we deal with is, and that's a cause of the regional housing shortage, is that there are 101 separate zoning authorities inside of Route 495. And everybody is in a kind of we'll let the other towns do it because we don't want the schools, we don't want the costs, we don't want the traffic. Well, no, that's got to be shared out. And if this MBTA guideline can be worked out in a way that provides some additional density, whether it's 3 or 4 family units or small apartment buildings or whatever, closer to T stations throughout the region, this might be something that improves things and shares burdens that to the extent that there are burdens for all the communities, but makes life better for all the people that live here. So again, I want to thank everybody for their patience and participation, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Matthews. So I don't see any other questions from the attendees. Any of the other panelists have any thoughts or comments before I hand it over to Lee? It doesn't seem to be so. Lee, do you want to move on with the rest of the presentation?
Sure. I just want to thank the committee, and I want to thank all the Needham residents who took the time to participate tonight in the beginning of what will be a process to hopefully lead to some positive outcomes for Needham and for the region as we begin to address housing affordability needs. And I just wanted to talk about what this committee's, I think, next steps are going to be, just so people understand what the program looks like going forward and what the expectations are. So over the course of the next month, the committee is going to be working on completing what we call a draft housing needs assessment. This is basically a document that's going to summarize the key demographics and economic characteristics of Needham, and it's going to characterize what we have identified to be key housing needs. And that's going to be followed on March 24th with a town-wide workshop where those housing needs and priorities will be presented to the community, and the community will be allowed to maybe go into breakout groups to view those housing needs and help us identify what strategies might be put in place and be supported by the community to begin to address those identified needs. And when the consensus points at that meeting are developed and articulated, we hope to do a town-wide community survey to get broader community input on what we have identified as potential strategies and objectives. And that's going to then lead to the development subsequently of what I'll call a strategic housing plan, which will identify the strategies, the goals, the timelines for accomplishing the objectives that we all agree on. And then the implementation, which could either be in the form of zoning or other kinds of policy programs the town wants to develop. So that's, I think, what the next steps are. And I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to participate. And we look forward to seeing you on March the 24th for a community meeting. And who knows, maybe we'll all be live at that point and not sitting in front of our TV screens. We can keep our fingers crossed.
I hope that will be true, that we'll be able to have a live meeting in Powers Hall for March 24th. If that's all and the other members are all set, if anybody else wants to do a final comment, you're welcome. Is there any final comment that anybody wishes to make before I ask for a motion to adjourn?
I just want to say this has been fantastic, really interesting to listen to, and amazing comments and great input from everyone. And it's really been a good thing to listen to. And I feel like I've learned a lot about what people care about. So thank you to everyone who participated.
Good. All right, well, at this point then, I ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. I will do a roll call on this. Jan Matthews,
Yes.
Oscar Mertz,
Yes.
Ed Carsgrove,
Yes.
Michael O'Brien,
Yes.
Natasha Espada,
Yes.
Emily Cooper,
Yes.
Rhonda Spector,
Yes.
Marcus Nelson,
Yes.
Ed Scheidler,
Yes.
Helen Gregory,
Yes.
Laura Dorfman,
Yes.
and Carol Fischetti.
Yes.
We stand adjourned. Good night, all. I'm so glad we had good attendance from our group and from the public.
Thanks, Jean. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Jean.
Thank
Thanks
you. Good
all.
night.
Night, everyone.
Thank you. Good
Night.
night.
Natasha.